I have no choice but to. I got to give the Browns props here, especially Baker Mayfield. If there was ever a day that Mrs. Baker Mayfield should be tweeting, it's this morning. Because that performance last night was spectacular on the part of Baker Mayfield. Make no mistake about that. He was absolutely sensational, throwing for over 340 yards. This brother was dropping dimes all over the place. I was incredibly impressed. You know, Stefanski had him on the move. He was scrambling to his right, throwing the fast. I mean, he was taking chances. He was making smart plays. He was going through his progressions. Baker Mayfield was incredibly impressive. I give credit where credit is due. And with all of those damn progressive commercials that I told y'all we were going to see, last night was the first night that it was completely unapologetic and unapologetic. It was absolutely validated. Baker Mayfield showed up and showed what he's capable of. That's the number one overall pick we've been looking for. That's the guy that took Oklahoma to the college football players. That's the guy that won the Heisman Trophy. That's the guy everybody's been looking for. He showed up last night. And if he shows up and plays like that, along with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt being able to run the football the way that they can run the football, I got news for you. Cleveland is going to be a big-time bona fide threat. A matter of fact, we might have ended up sleeping on them. They might be the biggest threat to Kansas City because of their ability to run the football. Not defensively, because we know they can't stop Patrick Mahomes. But if they can run the football, which we know they can do, and Baker Mayfield's throwing the football like that, I got to stand down and give credit where credit is due. The brother was sensational last night. He deserves all the props in the world because of it. And Cleveland is an entirely different team when you're looking at them if Baker Mayfield plays like that, because we have to assume their defense is not going to stink as much as it stunk last night and allowing over 230 yards rushing to Baltimore.
Yeah, the Browns have about a league average defense, give or take, maybe low average, but they got a good enough defense. And I have to give props to Baker also. He was excellent. The level of difficulty on some of those plays also, he wasn't just getting lucky. It was intentional. And with the money on the line, I love the way he was sitting there on the sidelines just nodding after he saw what Lamar Jackson did. Like, okay, you got it. Now it's my turn. And led him right down the field, big time from Baker. It just goes to show, Stephen A., I always say, like, in sports, when you believe in a guy, patience, and just when you run out of patience, more patience. I learned that lesson again with Baker. Just when I was like, okay, I'm done. He's proving it. He's had 4 head coaches in just a little over 2 years. No stability. He finally has some. He's clicking with a head coach, and he's very good. Now, I don't think the Browns are the biggest threat to the Chiefs. I don't think that they are Super Bowl contenders in the sense that I would pick them to win the Super Bowl or be one of the 5 or 6 teams I'd even pick. And here's the thing. Before we talk about, and I understand you mean styles matchup, if you can run the ball and everything, but yes, really running the ball against the Chiefs, it's not about the Chiefs' run defense so much as it is keeping Patrick Mahomes off the field. In fact, the Steelers' time of possession is quite good, kind of simulating a run with dinking and dunking. Let me just say this about the Browns. Everything you said about Baker is true. You have every reason to be impressed, as do we all, right? The fact of the matter is they lost the game. How many times have the Browns beaten the Steelers or the Ravens? The 2 teams in their own division this year. The answer is none. They've lost to the Steelers, twice to the Ravens, and once to the Steelers. They have a chance in the last game of the season to beat the Steelers. I'll take the Steelers. Right? And so if you're the 3rd best team in your own division with the money on the line, I can't consider you a Super Bowl contender unless you're in the best division in football. And I also don't believe that's the case. I'll still take the NFC West in spite of certain teams' struggles in that division recently. So Baker and the Browns showed that they are a good and ascending team. That what I've been saying, in fact, you said it too. Get Odell and Baker away from each other. When we were talking about trade Odell Beckham, it wasn't just Baker's no good, Odell needs to go. It's that these two don't have chemistry, and they're probably going to perform better separate than together. And I think Baker's showing you that. He has a connection with Jarvis Landry, spreading the ball around. Njoku almost made, or maybe even should have made, a catch on a nice throw from Baker. High level of difficulty, but it was catchable. But he's spreading the ball around. The running game is working. The defense is good enough with Odell away from him. Still, Is it good enough to beat the Chiefs? It wasn't good enough to beat the Ravens last night. It wasn't good enough to beat the Ravens week 1. It wasn't good enough to beat the Steelers. The Chiefs are better than both those teams.
Well, listen, it was good enough to beat Indy. It was good enough to beat Tennessee, and we know both of those teams are capable of beating some teams in the AFC. Number one. Number two, I'm glad you illuminated the fact. I'm talking styles when I'm talking about the Chiefs. We know that the Browns, particularly at this point, ain't on the Chiefs level. But I'm just talking about styles. If Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt can run the football, and oh, by the way, you've got Kareem Hunt catching passes out of the backfield or what have you, that's something that can't be ignored as well. And how potent their offense could be. Again, if Baker Mayfield plays that way and they run the football effectively, those are the kind of things that can happen. The other thing that I wanted to say to both you and Molly is this. I think it was in November of 2018. It was a Monday night game. It was the Chiefs and the Los Angeles Rams. I was at that game. I was in the suite. You can appreciate this, Max. I was in the suite for ESPN LA radio. They had a suite in the end zone. On the field. I was at that game with my brother-in-law, my brother Jeff, and the whole bit, my boy Jeff and the whole bit. It's the greatest game that I had ever been a part of in the NFL. To be there was spectacular. Last night might have been maybe the greatest Monday Night Football game we've seen. Because remember, that particular game with the Rams and the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes threw for 6 touchdowns, but he also threw 3 interceptions. He threw for over 400-plus yards. Jared Goff threw for over 400-plus yards, but Patrick Mahomes threw 3 interceptions. Last night, to watch these two teams go back and forth the way that they did, it was something special. It really, really was. And I look at Cleveland today a little bit differently because of how they came back in that fourth quarter and how they tried to handle their business.
The difference is the Chiefs and the Rams back then were considered, that was a Super Bowl everyone wanted to see. Those are the 2 best offenses in the world. And in the Rams' case, they also had a defense. I would say most people at that moment were thinking Rams over Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And this is a taste. Here's a preview. So the stakes were higher. This was more about, can the Browns, the little brother in the division, on its way up, hold off a desperate Ravens team that has struggled recently, right? And the answer was no. They played well. They're heading in the right direction. Insofar as there are moral victories in the NFL, that was one for the Browns and for Baker Mayfield. But in the end, the Ravens not only got the moral victory of Lamar Jackson coming in on 4th down and completing the 44-yard play to score the go-ahead touchdown, but then 4 completions to get them in field goal range after Baker went right back down. So the Ravens not only got the moral victory, they got the actual W, which they need to get into the playoffs this year. I think the game you were at was actually higher stakes emotionally in terms of the overall picture in the NFL.
Yeah. And I will leave you guys with this, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here in Cleveland because they certainly have evolved as a team, Baker included, but they have allowed over 500 yards on defense the past 2 games in the second half alone. That's obviously concerning, and it took Lamar Jackson leaving for them to actually get back in the game. So it is what it is on that front. We will leave it there. When we come back, plenty more NFL.